For years, I have been taking a pretty standardized approach to designing each new map in Cogmind, and although we have dozens of them now, it's one of the few topics I have never covered on the blog. This is essentially because a serious in-depth look at the entire process would require spoiling a lot of content, considering that all the most interesting maps have been located beyond the early game. But with the recent release of Beta 8, which adds a very interesting map right to the early game, we now have a good opportunity to discuss map design without worrying too much about spoilers, since for the most part it is a little accessible content anyway. This article will walk through every stage of the design and implementation process, from start to finish. I took a lot of notes about the process itself as I was building Beta 8, specifically so I could share them here, and to ensure that what I write is an accurate representation of what actually went down. Note that unlike the majority of maps in Cogmind, due to its nature, this particular map has a mostly static layout and content rather than drawing heavily on procedural methods. As such, the process is missing a few steps, but I will cover those separately in Unidabin. A mostly static map, on the other hand, provides some unique discussion opportunities of its own. Before even starting, each map idea needs one or more concepts to build around, and in this case we have several goals. For a very long time my notes for potential Cogmind features contained the concept of derelict labs, a way to access strange and fun technology. So when I started feeling when do you need an area of the game to achieve all those goals, this concept seemed particularly fitting. Once I decided this was likely to happen, several months before actually doing it, I began intermittently revisiting that section of my notes to expand it with new ideas and considerations. On each new visit, to add more ideas, I did intentionally avoid rereading previous notes on that topic, instead just appending any new thoughts at the bottom. This keeps me in the unique frame of mind I am in at the time, allowing me to come up with potentially very different ideas, or even perhaps the exact same ideas again without realizing it. Is because usually days or even weeks have passed, and I have forgotten the details of my earlier ideas. Note that coincidentally repeating notes on the same ideas can actually be valuable, because it validates them, perhaps with different reasoning, or even fleshes them out in different directions I had not thought of. In previous note-taking sessions, this process resulted in a total of about 600 words of rough notes on the topic, which, like all of my notes, are organized as nested list in a TXT file. The entirety of rough notes on the new map, as seen in my editor. Normally I just delete rough notes once their contents have been implemented or converted to more permanent notes elsewhere. But this time I saved them to share with you. Read the original notes here. You will need line wrapping up to view them properly. Since the notes are a top to bottom process, you can see how they kept getting longer and longer with each extension as I apparently went back and forth on various points. There's even final summary, followed by the typical final notes, followed by wait, final reverses that, XD. In short, a new mini-faction of exiles from another community has their own land, offering the player both a will sensor ability of Farcom and access to prototype data from among a pool of possible items. Story-wise, they become the player's earliest significant exposure to the world's lore. As such, it's good that I have circled back around to add this map after the rest of the world is already completed, so they can hook into it properly based on my knowledge of how everything can play out both in terms of story and gameplay. The alternative, trying to build this map from the start, would be likely meant repeatedly updating or changing its contents as the rest of the world was built. Cogmind's world was almost entirely built from beginning to end, rather than skipping around. I am not a fan of ripping out or making significant changes to old content, preferring to get it right the first time. So back in late October, when it came time to add the exiles, the first task was to reorganize those rough notes. This normally means reading back over them to remove the stupid ideas, refine rough ideas, and generally consolidate the notes while expanding on any unclear points, making sure it all fits together in support of my vision for the map. I did not spend very long in this phase, though, because there were simply too many notes this time around, and more importantly, they were just going to be converted to a new farm shortly afterward anyway. After just deleting some unnecessary chunks and making a few modifications, I quickly started on the proper map design doc. The last planning stage before actually working on a map is to finalize all its relevant nodes into a basic format I have been using since the beginning of Cogmind Alpha. Each map generally has its own text file describing its design. I call these text files supplements, since the idea originated when I started using these external files to supplement Cogmind's original design doc, a massive file which started to get a little unwieldy by the time the first public alpha was released after 2 years. Plus, I did not like the format program that was used to create the original doc, and wanted to start moving away from that. And by then the entire primary design doc had been implemented anyway. Supplements for various maps added over the years. Xe is the code for Exile's node is size relative to the others. It happens to be one of the more complex maps, with a lot of possible content and various scenarios. Map design docs break down their contents into a number of common sections, including at the very least the following. These are the main 4. But some maps have 1 or 2 additional node categories applicable to that map in particular. For example, the Exile's design doc has a location section, because unlike most maps, there are a number of important comments to make regarding how to access this map in the first place, and its general position in the world. There's also a large part concepts section for collecting ideas for their stash of prototypes. You can read the entirety of the Exile's map design doc here. Again, turn off line wrapping. If you checked out the rough notes earlier, you can see how they evolved into the proper design doc, which was in at 3 times the size, about 7,500 Vs. Some of the minor details in this doc may not be the same in the final implementation, since I sometimes make last-minute changes that are not necessarily reflected back in the notes. But it's mostly accurate. It's extremely important to expand the initial map design process to include considerations beyond the map itself. How that map fits into the bigger picture with regard to overall player strategy should be determined in advance, since it can have a broad impact on a map's content, and if not careful, a poorly planned map could end up needing more significant changes later on if players find that it's either not very interesting or useful to them in the long run. There is currently one optional map in Cogmind, which unfortunately fits this description: recycling. It's a relatively simple, small map with some unique mechanics of its own, but its advantages are not really as enticing for players as I had first envisioned them when it was created early in Cogmind Alpha. Back then I was just getting started adding optional maps, and have learned a lot since then, including by way of the player community as it's matured. I have plans to improve it one day, but it's not a prior one. Zero priority since it's rather out of the way anyway. I would not want to waste the player time on my own. So the Exiles map, in particular, has a number of long-term strategic implications, and properly building them into the experience as a whole involved addressing different kinds of player needs, goals, and